In this video, we're going to go through and demonstrate the user interface controls on the BBC Piano Professional Library. In the top left-hand corner of the interface, we have the LED light. When this is flickering red and green, it is an indication that the sample content is preloading into the memory of your machine. Wait until this is solid green before you hit play in your DAW or try and trigger any samples. We then have the CPU meter, which is an indication of how hard the processor on your machine is working. We then have a disk meter, which is an indication of how hard the samples drive you're streaming the samples from is working. If these are flickering red and green, please get in touch with us because there's a good chance that we need to optimize the performance of the library on your machine. We then have a memory meter, which is an indication of how much sample data is preloaded into the memory of your machine. To the right, the voices meter indicates how many audio threads we're streaming at any particular one point in time. We then have a refresh icon, which is really useful for anything like hanging MIDI notes. The refresh button can be right-clicked to see further options. The mode switching option will only be available to you if you have one of the other products installed, for example, BBC Core or Discover. To the right of this, we have the MIDI channels options, which is where we can choose from 1 to 16 MIDI channels for the plugin to respond to. We then have a global tuning control and a global panning control. To the right of these is the global master volume for the library. To the right, we then have the preset settings. Now, these are settings which affect the given preset that you have loaded inside the plugin. So the very first option, which is the dynamics option, controls the behavior of the fader in the middle of the plugin. You can choose from 4 different options. You have full velocity range, velocity map to dynamics, and the 2 compressed velocity options. The 2 compressed velocity options are quite useful in the piano library because they act like a MIDI limiter and they will allow you to limit the dynamic response of the library to a particular dynamic layer. Below this we have the velocity curves, which you can cycle through to get different responses for the plugin from your controller. So if you have a keyboard which is overly sensitive and you trigger high velocities really easily, you might wish to set this to exponential negative. We then have the ability to clear and reset the default CC mappings. So as you can see, if I right click the dynamics fader, it's automatically set to MIDI CC number 1. But if I was to remove this, as you can see there, it no longer has a MIDI CC. And I go back to the preset settings and click reset. We now have MIDI CC 1 restored. The short releases option allows you to have the timed and untimed options. When the plugin is set to timed, the releases will play a release trigger, but it will cut off the original sample. But this will only happen if the note duration is short enough. The untimed releases play the release regardless of the duration of the note. We then have the solo latch option, which will affect the behavior of the signal mixer, which we'll come to later in this video. To the right of this, we have the global settings for the whole plugin, which is where we can change things such as the default scale, so the size, whether the key switches are shown, the behavior of how certain controls are dragged using your mouse, the ability to disable host automation. We have the audio settings, which is where you can set how much content is preloaded into the RAM of your machine. And you can also set the default preset here as well from the list of all the available patches. If you want to learn more about these settings in detail, please see the user manual because each setting is covered in much more detail. Below this we have the collapse and expand view, and to the left of that we have the preset menu, which you can open using the drop down menu on the left hand side. As you can see here on the left hand side, we have a wide range of filters. So when you have the whole library installed, you will get all the different filtering options for all the different sections. For example, I can now see the brass. Next to a preset, you have a little starred icon. Now when you click that to favourite the sound, it will appear in the starred filter in the top. You then have a clear option to also reset the filtering system. You have a play button to preview a sound and also an information icon in order to learn a little bit more about the sound that you wish to select. Double clicking or clicking and pressing load will load a patch. The two arrows to the right of the preset name allow you to cycle up and down through the different presets. It's worth noting that if you have a filter enabled, these arrows will cycle up and down the patches available to you within that filter. The save icon allows you to save a custom user preset, which will then show up in this user filter at the bottom. Moving down the interface once more, we then have the expression control. The expression control is a volume control which operates within the master volume of the library. We then have the dynamics control, which enables us to change the behavior of the dynamic response of what we're playing. The knob to the right is by default a reverb control, but this can be selected for further options such as tightness, the pedal volume and the hammer volume. The tightness control, when increased, will eat into the start of the sample, making the response snappier. However, the further you go, the more unnatural the performance. This is quite useful if you're quantizing your MIDI data to your grid. We then have the pedal volume, which will change the overall volume of the pedal samples every time you lift the sustain pedal. The hammer volume will change the volume of the hammer sounds on release of a note. Increase to hear more or decrease to hear less. Moving down the interface for BBC Piano Pro, we only have one particular technique available to us. This means there's no key switching options. However, we do have a range of round robin options. So from here you can see that there are 4 round robins for this particular library. And we have a reset on transport control. The reset on transport will allow the round robin cycle to reset every time you hit play in your DAW. The reset from key enables you to place key switches on the keyboard for each round robin. So if there's one that you maybe don't like because it has a particular resonance, you can use key switches to swap out a particular round robin for another. The round robin options enables you to neighbour zones for a particular round robin, or it allows you to stack and layer those round robins. The neighbouring zone round robins allow you to borrow samples from a neighbouring zone and stack them onto the same note, so you get more round robins than just the 4. The layering options allow you to stack the round robins, and this in turn will give you a slightly thicker sound. We then have a transpose option, so you can transpose the key range, and the two-handed layout is not available for this particular patch. Using the view selector in the middle of the interface, we can then swap to the signals page. So in the top left-hand corner of the signal mixer, we have the ability to save a custom mic mix. We have the ability to reset the mic mixer back to its default, and we also have the option to load a custom microphone mix that we have saved. The advanced view, when unchecked, can give us a close sound or a further away sound. The global view won't really affect the piano library because there's only one technique, but what this control enables the user to do is set different microphone balances and different signals depending on the technique or articulation that you have selected. Because there's only one, this isn't really a feature in the BBC piano. We then have the signal fader, which can be clicked and dragged to set the volume. If you drag this all the way down, it will disable that particular signal. Below the loading toggles, we have the solo and muting options. As you can see here, as I'm soloing through a signal, it becomes unlatched and moves forward. However, if I go back to the preset settings and I select solo latch, this now means when I click through, we can stack the solo buttons and also stack the mute buttons. It's worth noting that if you disable a signal by dragging it down, that will also disable the solo and muting for that particular signal. You can use the two arrows at the bottom of the signal mixer to cycle through to see even more microphone signals. Moving to the right, we then have the stereo width controls, which is where we can choose to make the close and spot signals more wide, or we can also make them mono. We have a panning control, which also only affects the close signals. And we also have a left and right channel invert. There's a lock in the top right corner, which will also enable you to lock all of these microphone settings in place. Back to the middle of the interface, we have the effects page, which is where we can see all of the different controls which are also available to us on this control at the top. If you have any further questions about the BBC SO piano, please do get in touch with us at spitfireaudio.com/support.
Thanks for watching Spitfire Clips. Let us know if it was too long, too short, too fast, or too slow in the comments down below. Hit like if we answered your question, and subscribe for more clips, tips, tricks, and exclusive Spitfire content.